Okay, so girls, today we will continue with xerophytic plants. Last class we had discussed on the ecological adaptations of the hydrophytes, that is the water-loving plants. Okay, the plants that usually live in uh, water condition. Now, in case of we have already seen that on the basis of their habitat, the water requirement, and as well as the nature of the soil, the plants, they can be classified into hydrophytes, xerophytes, mesophytes, halophytes, and epiphytes. Okay, so the topic that we are going to discuss today is on the second type of plants, that is the xerophytic plants. Okay, the ecological adaptations of xerophytes. Now, xerophytes, we know that they are such plants which grow in dry, also known as xeric habitat. Okay, in dry habitat or xeric habitats, and they have a very poor supply of available water. Whereas we know that hydrophytes, they are such plants which grow in wet places or in water, either partially or completely, or they are immersed completely inside they grow inside the water bodies or partially. Okay, so today we are going to see what are ecological adaptations of the xerophytic plants. Now, the here habitat, the xeric habitat, as I said, that it is a place where water is not present in adequate quantity. So coming to the, you can see here the xerophytes are the characteristic plants of the deserts and the semi-desert areas, and they can also grow in mesophytic conditions. So since we will not be doing mesophytes because it's not there in your syllabus, so just to let you know what are mesophytes, they are such plants which grow in an environment that are neither too dry nor too wet. Okay, so these xerophytes, which can live in desert condition, in where there is very less water, in dry condition, they can also grow in mesophytic condition, that is neither too dry nor too wet. And you can see here that the xerophytes, they can tolerate the extreme dry condition, low humidity, and very high temperatures, such as in deserts. Okay, in desert areas, and they can also withstand high wind flow. Okay, so these are the four different the xerophytes, they can tolerate the extreme dry condition, low humidity, high temperature, as well as high wind flow. And three types of xeric habitats occurs on the earth. That is, the first one you can see here is the physically dry habitat. Here in physically dry habitat, the water retaining capacity of the soil is very low. Okay, and the climate is very dry. The example for this physically dry habitat is the desert. Now, the second one is the physiologically dry. That is, water is present in excess but not in absorbable conditions, or the plants, they cannot absorb this water. So where can you find such condition? Dry condition is high salt water, high acidic water, high cold water, water in the form of snow. So you see here, since these plants, they cannot absorb high salt water, they cannot absorb high acidic water, they cannot absorb high cold water, so they remain in a dry condition. So this type is referred to as physiologically dry. Now the third type is both physically and physiologically dry, meaning the water present as mist. Okay, that is, the plants, they cannot absorb water from the atmosphere directly. Example of such habitat are the mountain slopes. And you see here, these are the some examples of the xerophytes. Okay, the first type of xerophytic plants, they are the Effi, Merrell xerophytes. That is, those type of xerophytic plants which are short-lived. Okay, and these are the examples given here: the Tribulus terrestris, Trianthema monogyna, Carthamus oxyacantha. So these are the three types which fall under this category, that is the ephemeral xerophytes, that is short-lived xerophytes. Now the second type that we have here is the succulent xerophytes. Now succulent plants, we know that they are those plants with fleshy and succulent parts. Okay, and again within these there are two types: those plants which are succulents with fleshy stem, and the plants which fall under this category, the examples are the Opuntia, then the Echinocactus, Euphorbia royliana. So these are the plants with fleshy stem, the succulent plants with fleshy stem. Then we have the second type, they are those plants, succulent plants with fleshy leaves. Okay, and these plants with fleshy leaves, they are also referred to as the Malacophilous and the Malacophilous xerophytes, and the example are aloe vera, then agave, then peperomia, haworthia, bryophyllum, and kalanchoe. So these are the succulent plants, okay, the xerophytes with fleshy leaves. So we have the with fleshy stem and the fleshy leaves which fall under this succulent xerophytes. Now coming to the third type, that is non-succulent xerophytes. We have succulent xerophytes and non-succulent xerophytes. So we have three types, remember: the ephemeral xerophytes, those short-lived xerophytes; the succulent xerophytes, plants with fleshy and succulent parts, which we have two types: fleshy stem and fleshy leaves; and we have the non-succulent xerophytes, and these are some of the examples of the non-succulent xerophytes. Now directly we'll come to the adaptations. Now, what is the adaptation strategy of xerophytes? Is to absorb as much of water as they can get from the surrounding, because we know that these plants, they live in such a dry condition. So whatever water is present there, as much as they can, they will absorb the water. So they become fleshy, their body, it becomes very fleshy. Why? Because they can absorb so much water in order to retain the water in their organ for a very long time. You can see here the second point. Then the third point, to reduce the water loss by transpiration to minimum. We know that the plants, they used to transpire to lose the loss of water. It takes place through transpiration in plants. So these xerophytes, they adapt themselves in dry condition. How they adapt themselves? In such a way that in order to reduce water loss by transpiration, in order to retain the water in their organ for a very long time, and also to absorb as much of water as they can get from the surrounding, and not only that, to prevent high consumption of water. So these are the adaptation strategies of xerophytes. Okay, so we will study now. We will see what are the different xerophytic adaptations, such as morphological, then anatomical adaptation, and physiological adaptation. Okay, as you can see here, the one which I have this one in this diagram, it is a succulent plant. Okay, it is a xerophytic plant. Echeveria, it is a succulent plant. You can see it has a thick fleshy leaves and epicuticular waxes. Okay, it is covered with waxes so that in order to reduce the water loss by evaporation. So now the first adaptation of xerophyte is morphological adaptation. So when we talk about morphological adaptation, the first thing that we are going to discuss is the habit. So what is the habit of these xerophytic plants? They have less overall surface area. Okay, they have overall less surface area as compared to other plants, and these plants, they have this less surface area that is exposed to the air. Thus in this way they reduce the water loss by evaporation or by transpiration. Okay, in some xerophytes, the plant surface, they are also covered with tiny hairs. And this will provide the windbreak as well as reduce the airflow, thus reducing the water loss by evaporation. Now coming to the roots, the next habit, the first one is the habit, and the next morphological adaptation is the roots. Now the roots of these xerophytes, they are well developed. Okay, why? In order to secure water from the dry water deficient soil. Now the roots, along with the roots, there you will find in the roots of xerophytic plants there are well developed root hairs. These root hairs, they help in penetration, especially in very they help to penetrate very deep inside the soil. Why? Because in drought condition where water is available in very deep soil, these roots will penetrate very deeply to reach the water surface to absorb the water. Okay, so just remember that the roots, they are well developed, and also they have root hairs which can penetrate deep into the soil where water is available for absorption to different soil layers. Now coming to the stem, in these succulent plant, the stem, it usually becomes swollen, bulbous, fleshy green, and also leaf-like. Okay, I will show you some other diagrams later on. These succulent plants, they have the stem known as the phylloclade. Okay, phylloclade. The stem here, it serves as a water storing and as well as a photosynthetic organs. Okay, it also take part in photosynthesis. Now example in such succulent plant is euphorbia. And we have, whereas in true xerophytes, the leaf or the stem is modified into spines or thorns. Okay, in this way reducing the surface area. For example, the species which fall under these true xerophytes, they are Duranta repens. In Duranta repens, you can see the leaf, the stem, they are modified into thorns, into spines or thorns to reduce the surface area to prevent water loss, to reduce water loss. And in many other true xerophytes, there is also a reduction in stem surface area, and the stem perform the photosynthesis. Okay, for example, in Asparagus racemosus, a number of axillary branches, they become modified to form small greenish needle-like structures, and these small greenish needle-like structures, they are called cladodes, and these cladodes, they serve in water uh, for water storage. Okay, they serve as water storing organs, and these cladodes, they also perform synthesis. So let me show you some other diagrams later on, okay, to show you these stems which modified into thorns, and then the phylloclades, and then the cladodes. Okay, so the fourth xerophytic, sorry, the stem, the fourth type is reflectivity. Now in many xerophytes, the surface of the stem is covered with wax. Okay, is covered with wax or hairs. And these wax or hairs, they serve to reflect the sunlight. Because you know that in the sun, the water evaporation can occur. So these wax will help to prevent, to reduce evaporation in such plants. And in some plants such as Equisetum, okay, in this xerophytic plant, in addition to wax, the stem is also covered with silica. So these are some of the morphological adaptation in case of the stem. Let me show you some diagram. Okay, here you can see in figure, the first figure here, is of phylloclade in Opuntia. You can see we have the phylloclade, that is the fleshy green and leaf-like stem, okay, which becomes swollen and bulbous, okay, known as the phylloclade. You can see this one, the phylloclade. And also you can, these they serve as water storing as well as photosynthetic organs. Now even here you can see in this species also we have the phylloclade. And here the second figure, it shows, okay, in Opuntia you can also see the leaf spine. Okay, so in true xerophytes, the leaf or the stem, as I had mentioned, is modified into spine or thorns to reduce surface area. And the cladodes, you can see these are referred to as the cladodes. Okay, this one, the cladodes, you can see these the reduction in stem surface area, and also perform, and the stem also it perform photosynthesis, and you can see a number of axillary branches they modified. Okay, these are the axillary branches, they get modified to form small greenish needle-like structures. They are in the form of needles, okay, needle-like structures which called the cladodes. Okay, and then we have we have the, okay, I just want to show you these different types of stems and the leaves which are found in xerophytes. And also I had mentioned the fourth one, that is reflectivity. Okay, the morphological adaptation in xerophyte is reflectivity, where the surface of the stem is covered with wax, that, and also the hairs, in that way they can reflect the sunlight. That is why they can reduce evaporation. Now coming to the leaves. Okay, the leaves, they are modified in such a way that water loss due to transpiration reduces to minimum. And depending upon the shape of the leaves and their structure, xerophytes, again, they are classified into four types. You can see the first one is the sclerophilous, where the leaves they become stiff and hard. And the second type, the trichophilous, where the leaves they are covered with hairs. The microphilous, where the leaves are smaller in size and reduced. And the malacophilous, where the leaves are soft and fleshy. So depending on the shape of the leaves, the xerophytes are classified into these four types. And the leaves of xerophytes, they are generally caducous, and in some cases these may be even absent. And also the leaves, they roll when the condition becomes dry and hot. Okay, sometimes the leaves of these xerophytes roll when the condition, the climatic condition there where these are present is, it becomes very dry and very hot. Okay, I forgot to mention here that the leaves, they are, here you can see this word caducous. Okay, are generally caducous, meaning they are greatly reduced and fall prematurely. So when this term caducous, meaning they fall prematurely, example in case of euphorbia. And in some cases these may be even absent, such as Capparis aphylla. And here in grasses, the leaves, as I had already mentioned, the rolling of the leaves becomes when the condition is very dry and hot. Okay, the leaves become rolled, or they are folded in such a way that the stomata are directly inwards. So in this way they shut away, the stomata are shut away from the external atmosphere, thus reducing transpiration or evaporation of water. Okay, that means loss of water. So in this way these grasses, in case of grasses which are xerophytes, the leaves they usually roll when the climate becomes very dry in order to prevent transpiration or evaporation. So these are the morphological adaptation. Okay, in case we have seen in case of habit, the roots, the stems, and the leaves. Now the next part that we are going to discuss is the anatomical adaptation. Okay, so coming to the anatomical adaptation, now in cellular as well as tissue levels, the xerophytic plants, they develop many anatomical adaptive features, okay, which help them to adapt or which help them to cope with the extreme environmental conditions, especially to reduce the water loss from the plant. Now, some of the anatomical adaptive features are in case of epidermis. So let us take a look at this diagram here. Now, in order to prevent the evapotranspiration in these plants, the epidermis, it usually becomes multi-layered. Okay, as you can see here, that the epidermis, just see in this diagram, it is multi-layered in case of xerophytic plant, and epidermal surface the epidermal surface here is covered with a thick cuticle. Okay, so the cuticle is very thick, and the epidermis, it is multi-layered, and also in the cuticular layer there is deposition of waxes, and I had already mentioned that these wax, they help to minimize the water loss. Okay, and also you can find in the epidermal layer, you will find the epidermal hairs and the deposition of wax on the surface of these of the epidermal region. It may serve to reflect the sunlight and also to reduce evaporation. Now let me show you one more diagram here. Okay, this one here, it is reported that the epicuticular wax, okay, that is epicuticular wax, is the coating wax covering the outer surface of the plant cuticle. Okay, in these xerophytic plants, this epicuticular wax, it is in the form of a white chalky wax, and it has the highest UV reflectivity of any known naturally occurring biological substance. So this is the species of Dudleya britoni. Okay, here this diagram I'm showing you, this is the thick cuticular epicuticular wax. Okay, the white chalky wax, which actually help to reflect the UV from the sun, and this species Dudleya, it has the highest UV reflectivity of any known naturally occurring biological substance, this wax. And also in case of xerophytic plants, the stomata are of sunken type, and they are usually situated in the furrows of the pith. Okay, they usually are situated in the furrows of the pith, and the stomatal chamber also, it is covered with hairs. Now, thus in this way, since it is covered with hairs, it is well protected from strong wind and also prevent the excessive water loss. And in some grasses, like I had mentioned, that these some grasses such as typha, okay, this is one of the species of xerophytic plant, typha. Some of the epidermal cell, just take a closer look at this picture here, you will see this one, the bulliform cells. Okay, these part here and this one here. So you can see here what happened, the epidermal cells here, and usually of the upper surface, not the lower surface, usually of the upper surface of the leaves, they are thin walled and they become more elongated. So as compared to these other cells, these bulliform cells, they are more elongated, more enlarged, and they are referred to as the bulliform cells or hinge cells or the motor cells. And what is the function of these cells? Actually, in dry condition, these cells, they facilitate the rolling of the leaves in these grasses. Okay, they facilitate the rolling. As a result, the sunken stomata it become hidden in this way, thus reducing transpiration or water loss. And during a moist season, these bulliform cells will again cause unrolling of the leaves by regaining their normal turgidity. So that is the function of these bulliform cells in xerophytic plants. Now, there is a another point here which I want to mention in some chaparral plants. Okay, what are chaparral plants? Are those plants which can live in those climate which is similar to Mediterranean climate. That is which has usually a very hot and dry summers, whereas they have usually have a mild, wet winters. The winter is usually wet, mild, rainy winters, and usually hot, dry summers. Those are referred to as the chaparral plants, which can live in those climatic conditions. So these plants, such as Malosma, this Melasma laurina, it usually secreted some scented and flammable resins. Now, what are resins? You have already studied in uh, plants, okay, such as pinus. They usually produce these resins that is sticky, flammable organic substance. So this Melasma also it usually secrete these flammable resins, and this resins it helped in the reduction of evaporation. And in xerophytes, let me show you of the pine that you already studied this. Remember when we study pinus in your second semester, the in xerophytes the leaves they are greatly reduced or they are shed in the dry seasons. Hence, photosynthetic activity is usually performed by the chlorenchymatous cortex of the stem. Okay, because the leaves they are greatly reduced or they are also shed in the dry season. So in this way, the photosynthetic activity is usually performed by the cortex, the chlorenchymatous cortex of the stem. And in case of succulent plants, we had already seen, I have shown to you that diagram. Okay, the ground tissue of the fleshy and swollen stem is made up of thin walled parenchymatous tissue, and this parenchymatous tissue it store excess water, mucilage, latex, and other substances which overcome the dry season. Okay, because it can store excess water, so these plants they usually they can overcome the dry condition. And here, as you can see, that the conductive tissues, that is the xylem and the phloem, they are well developed, and the hypodermal cells they are often of several layered. Just take a look at the hypodermis here in this diagram. You can see it is of several layered, compact, and sometimes it is usually filled with tannin and mucilage. And the in all we have also discussed that the mesophyll cell of the leaves they are very compact, and the intercellular spaces in the mesophyll, just see in this diagram, you can see here that the intercellular space are greatly reduced, and the endodermal cells also they are of several layered. And uh, here in pinus leaves, the inner lamella of the mesophyll cell, they are wavy. Okay, I hope you remember. You can see these are the mesophyll cells here. Sorry, this one. Alright, this is the mesophyll, and you can see that the cells here, the inner lamella of the mesophyll cells, they are wavy, that would accommodate more chlorophyll. Alright, it is wavy and it will help in the accommodation of more chlorophyll. So these are some of the anatomical adaptation in case of the xerophytic plants. So now we will discuss on the physiological adaptation. Okay, here now coming to the last part, alright, that is the physiological adaptations. Now, both structural or morphological adaptations of xerophyte, you can see that they are well suited to survive in drought conditions. You have seen that in case of structural, in morphological as well as anatomical adaptation of xerophytes, it is well suited for the plants to survive in drought conditions. And now we are going to study the physiological adaptation. So first, what I want to tell you here is that in case of water deficit, it means that when the water requirement of the plant is more as compared to the water supply. So you know that in drought condition, water supply is very less, because drought meaning the water is very less in drought areas. Okay, it is a very dry area. So the whereas the plants, they require more water in order to maintain the physiological functions. So here, water deficit, when there is water deficit in case of xerophytes, this water deficit, it actually stimulates leaf abscission as well as root growth. Here, leaf abscission, it means shedding of the leaf, that we have already discussed, that the plants in, they are greatly reduced and they usually shed in the dry season, right? So here the leaf during water deficit, the leaf abscission occur, that means the shedding of the leaf, whereas the growth of the root, it enhances the root growth. Okay, so water deficit, it enhances the root growth and it stimulates leaf abscission or leaf shedding. Now the water deficit, that is why it acts as a stress in xerophytic plants. So when these xerophytes, they are in a stress, they will stimulate to synthesize the ethylene hormone. Okay, so this ethylene hormone will be synthesized, and this ethylene hormone, it enhances the falling of the leaves, in the desert plants. And also, due to less availability of water in the soil, the plants, they will enhance the root growth, and thus these roots, they are able to penetrate much deeper into the soil layers where water is available. So remember, in physiological adaptation, what do we find? That during water deficiency, when in drought condition, this water deficit, it will stimulate the shedding of the leaves and it will enhances the root growth. And also, it will increase the water binding capacity of the cells through the synthesis of metabolites. So you can see here in the second point, xerophytic plants, they are reported to contain Pentosin polysaccharide. Pentosin is a polysaccharide. You have already studied what are polysaccharides, and this polysaccharide, it have been reported to offer resistance against drought condition. Alright, so these pentosins, along with several other nitrogenous compounds, they help in binding the water in the cell cytoplasm of succulent plants, okay, which help to accumulate excess amount of water in the cell. And you can see here in the fourth point that many xerophytes, they show CAM, okay, crassulaceous acid metabolism cycle. And this cycle, it is a carbon fixation pathway as an adaptation to arid conditions, okay, dry conditions. So many xerophytes, they show this type of cycle, CAM cycle. And in CAM plants, the stomata will be closed at daytime and they open only during the night, as they can absorb enough carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So this CAM cycle, it is a carbon fixation pathway which is which act as an adaptation to arid conditions for the xerophytic plant. So most of the xerophytes, they show this CAM cycle in order to regulate the carbon dioxide concentration mechanism. Okay, so these xerophytes, they show efficient carbon dioxide uptake mechanism. And the succulent plants, they are adapted in arid condition by conserving water. So during the night time, what happened, the cam plants, okay, those plants which show this cam cycle, the stomata, they remain open, allowing the carbon dioxide to enter and be fixed as malic acids, and they are stored in vacuoles. But what happened during the daytime? The stomata are closed, thus preventing water loss, and this malic acid which is being stored in the vacuoles, it will be freed from the vacuole to form carbon dioxide through decarboxylation, and it will enter the chloroplast. So in this way, the carbon dioxide concentration mechanism is regulated in these plants through CAM cycle. Okay, crassulation, acid metabolism cycle, in order to fix the carbon dioxide. Now, another type of physiological adaptation, okay, is enhancing the enzymatic activity. So you can see this point here. Okay, enhancing the enzymatic activity, that means several enzymes, for example catalases, peroxidases, amylases, they become more active in xerophytes as compared to other plants. Okay, for example amylase and hydrolases, the starch, these, they function more efficient in the hydrolysis of starch, okay, as compared to mesophytes. And also another physiological adaptation is that maintenance of water balance. So you can see this, we have already discussed many times, that xerophytes, they can regulate the rate of transpiration, okay, and they ensure the reduced rate of transpirational loss of water by forming a thick cuticle and distribution of stomata in the lower side of the leaf, then the sunken type of stomata, and positioning of stomata in pits with many hairs. So in this way they maintain the water balance in the cell. And also water deficit, it also enhances several physiological conditions. That means it increases resistance to water flow, and it enhances leaf wax deposition. Remember girls, that wax, it prevents, it helps to minimize the water loss from the leaf. And also the xerophytes, they possess high osmotic concentration of the cell sap. So high osmotic concentration, where the water, when the cell sap, it has a high osmotic concentration, so the water will not flow out from the cell. So thus cells, they have high osmotic pressure, and this osmotic pressure, it increases the turgidity of the cell. That is, the cell will become swollen, and this, the cell membrane, it pushes against the cell wall, so the cell will become swollen and it can accumulate high amount of water. And also this turgidity, it exerts tension force on the wall. So because of osmosis, water from the soil which reach the xylem of the roots of a plant, these water molecules, they stick together and they get pulled up by a force known as a tension force. So this turgidity, it exerts a tension force on the cell wall. Alright, so turgidity, it is a state of being swollen. That how, by when the cell's membrane, it pushes against the cell wall, in the cell will become swollen and it will be able to accumulate a huge amount of water. And also forming evaporation barrier to prevent the, in order to prevent the water loss. So the xerophytes, they shed their leaves in dry season, and as a result the leaf litter on the ground, In this way, they provide an evaporation barrier. Okay, even the waxes shed from some plants, they coat the ground and make them evaporation barrier, thus reducing water loss.